concern and really critical spinning out of control culture war that we have happening right now with wokeism. That's what I call it, wokeism, the use of racism to attack everybody. And retired Colonel Scott is also directly involved with a project to stop critical race theory and wokeism from continuing to hurt our officer leaders being developed at the United States Air Force Academy. And he's a graduate of the Academy and a member of the Alumni Association. So let's transition to that. And the reason why they're linked is not just the censorship, but it's an ideological issue. And when I say ideological issue, folks, those of us that fought against the communist Soviet Union and continued to fight against the communist Chinese understand the subversive nature of communist infiltration and what it really means. Not the crazy stuff you've heard about, but the real intelligence and counterintelligence efforts that end up using people that are called useful idiots. And Colonel Scott is a direct witness and is actively engaged and involved in making sure that our future military leaders in the United States Air Force are not infiltrated with this types of neo-Marxism that we've discussed about before. Tell us what happened last year, Ron, at the Air Force Academy with the football team and the coaches last summer when all of this Black Lives Matter thing was blowing up.
Well, first of all, my wife, Mary, and I live in Monument, Colorado, so we're 7 miles from the Air Force Academy. So you can imagine being so close to it, we're pretty aligned with what's going on. I received a call from a classmate on the 7th of July asking me if I was aware of a video that the Air Force Academy football coaches had published, and I had not. I went to the Colorado Springs Gazette where they had a link to it. The video was 3 minutes long. 7 times they mentioned in an angry tone, Black Lives Matter. And in between, they listed what they believed were cases of racial injustice in America. And the examples they used were redlining, Jim Crow laws, mass incarceration. I think I mentioned redlining, racial profiling, and police brutality. So there are about 5 different categories. Well, yeah. 2 of them are complicated, the mass incarceration and redlining, because there is a residual effect of both of those today in America. But Jim Crow laws went away in the 1960s. Racial profiling is illegal, and police brutality is completely distorted and misrepresented in the public narrative. And so we tried to point this out to the leadership there, and it took until 2 weeks ago for that video to come down. There was a desire not to take it down until a new video had been produced. And once that new video came out, and the theme was dignity and respect, and it was a short video, about 3 minutes, a lot better in its tone. But as I pointed out to the group that I'm with here, it still uses what's called Aesopian language, as in Aesop's fables, where there's 2 levels of communication. There's one for the public community, their consumption, and then there's one for those that are manipulating the narrative and implications from that. So dignity and respect sounds good, and we should all embrace that as ideals. But to come out with a video emphasizing that as a theme implies that we have a problem with dignity and respect, and that problem is rooted in systemic racism. So it's complicated to a lot of people that don't take the time to really investigate what's happening. They don't see it. And so that's what we've been trying to point out to them, that their notion of systemic racism, and it's the ideology behind it is called critical race theory. Critical race theory stems from another theory called critical theory, which was advanced in the 1930s by German scholars that came to America from Nazi Germany. They were part of the Frankfurt School, which was putting a happy face on Marxism. So they shifted the theory from an economic struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and made it more of a racial struggle. And then, of course, they've got other categories as well that we call identity groups. So it's designed to divide people, not unify them. And what makes it so dangerous for our military is that we are training these individuals, regardless of race, color, creed, to fight for America and what it stands for. And this whole movement really puts people into two major categories: those that believe in the original idea of America, and those that don't. And those that don't have become anti-America. And so we have this tremendous Marxist infiltration of our institutions, the service academies, but it's Department of Defense wide. It's across our federal agencies. We have diversity and inclusion officers in all of our federal agencies. And so it's institutionalized a notion of racism in America, and it's just not good.
You mentioned an anecdote about an incident with Coach DeBerry, the longtime football coach of the Force Academy football program. Tell the audience about that anecdote. That's part of the story, really.
It is. In 2005, Coach Fisher DeBerry, a great coach, he was asked at a press conference following a pretty healthy loss against Texas Christian University, what happened, Coach? And Fisher DeBerry said, well, if you notice, the other team has more African American players, and anthropologically, African American players can run faster and jump higher. They've just been trained over the years to have that increased capacity. And he was trying to be gentle in that, but he didn't want to say that because of redlining. Remember, that was one of the 5 issues brought up by the coaches. Because of redlining, a lot of these players can't meet the academic standards because they attend substandard schools. And so it was really difficult for Fisher to address that question without becoming politically incorrect. And so he was reprimanded for that by the superintendent at the time for being inartful in how he answered that question. But in reality, he was explaining that was a residual effect of redlining.
What was redlining from the civilian perspective, Ron? Explain that to the audience real quick.
Redlining was introduced in the 1930s as a means of identifying communities that were risky for home loans. And they tended to be the poor neighborhoods. So they had red lines around them. So if a resident from an area that was redlined with a red line around their suburb or their area of a town, then lenders would not lend them money to purchase a home. So it was called redlining. But as a consequence, that's also how school districts were organized. And so if you were in a redlined area, you went to a school district that was not as resourced as other schools. And a lot of the children attending those schools just did not, they dropped out, and they just didn't develop academically. And so we had that residual effect. We have it even today.
Yeah, I mean, there's another, I think DeBerry was onto something. I think he was probably inartful in how he said it. I'll be honest, I don't know his exact words, but when I was 50 now, so when I was a squadron commander, I was in my 40s, and a friend of mine who had been my commander twice before was an academy recruiter at one point, and we were getting hammered. The Air Force was because the numbers, the demographic numbers aren't representative, especially in the officer corps and the flying units of what America looked like then, and it's probably even worse now. And I just asked my friend, I said, "What's the deal?" Because you could look at the Air Force Academy class and see that even there, the issue was readily apparent. And one of the issues at that point, so this would have been in the 90s, and I think he was being very honest and open with me, was that look, we can't compete with other schools that are giving football scholarships, that these guys are going to go pro. That's part of what the issue was, and they really didn't want to. They didn't want to spend their time doing that. They had other ambitions in life. So I think that's a part. Do you think that this redlining that coming from bad schools is still hampering kids from the African American demographic? It's and other poverty stricken families from meeting the academic standards? Are we still there, or have we done anything that's helped that?
Absolutely, we're still there, and that's part of the narrative that gets distorted. For instance, police brutality. When you look at the actual statistics, a lot of it is aligned with this redlining concept that we've had since the 1930s. And inner cities, for instance, the black on black homicides is unbelievable. Now, the progressive Brennan Center for Law has come out with a report that says there's been a 500% increase in mass incarcerations over the last 40 years. Well, that coincides with the Great Society initiatives that were pushed by President Lyndon Johnson in those days. Well intended, but what they did, they took intact families that prior to that time were about 85% mother and father, to today where 80% of children in these inner cities have no father. 80% are fatherless. And so a lot of these boys are not getting the fatherly coaching, mentoring that they need to give them rules and an opportunity to compete and operate in the broader society. And that was a progressive center that came out with that statistics, and it's tied to redlining. Inner cities, we've had these inner cities. It's basically a modern plantation for a lot of these folks, which is unfortunate.
Folks don't want to hear terminology like that, Ron. But it's just what it looked like,
right?
People that try to use terms like plantation as a descriptor to bring folks to reality, and we kind of got a little bit sidetracked, but. What's the bottom line at the Air Force Academy, though? The superintendent, I think in 2008, one of the superintendents said there is systemic racism there.
Correct.
I was still in the Air Force in 2008. I was a vice wing commander and later became a wing commander. And I can't tell you how many policy documents about no tolerance of discrimination of any kind whatsoever I signed, and not just signed, but implemented and supported the policy, because that's what most people in the military believe, I think, and the few that don't end up getting out somehow.
Exactly. Well, it's you're right, Rob. In this past summer, I filed a FOIA request with 3 simple questions. Over the last 15 years, how many racial discrimination complaints have been filed per year? Number 2, of those complaints filed, how many violated our zero tolerance policies? And number 3, of those validated, what was the nature of accountability or discipline? It took 5 months to get an answer, and all it was aggregated data. It did not answer any of the 3 questions. The best I could figure out, it was over a 14-year period, there were 55 discrimination complaints filed. Now, that was not racial discrimination. That was discrimination. And so when you look at the categories that they list discrimination under, there's 10 different categories. Racial being one of them, one of 10. And so when you looked at the supporting documents, the raw spreadsheets and whatever, there were a lot of complaints filed in categories of age and pregnancy, disability, religion. And so even worst case, had those 55 complaints over the 14-year period been racial, that would have been less than 4 per year.
Yeah.
Which does not sound like systemic racism. Now, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist. I know it does.
Of course not.
And it's unfortunate. Right.
Yeah.
But to claim systemic racism feeds into a narrative that is false, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, the country, this is my opinion, from a military service perspective, I spent 32 plus years as enlisted an officer in the Air Force myself. My dad was enlisted. I have a brother that was enlisted in the Air Force. And, from our family's perspective, we've seen nothing but constant improvement. And by the time I retired, I was a wing commander at Albuquerque, New Mexico, Kirtland Air Force Base. I mean, there wasn't ever an issue with it. It was identified right away and dealt with. I mean, you just deal with that because it's just not something that's conducive to teamwork under fire. I mean, the men and women in the U.S. military have to be confident in each other under fire. And, you've been there. I've been there. Most of my friends and relatives that were in the military have been there, and nobody would ever. And I come from a very strong old, working poor Southern family. Southerners, they're Southerners, and a lot of them in the military. They would never, ever not do the right thing based on somebody's skin color or the fact they were a woman or whatever. It's just not the way those people were. And certainly not in the 21st century. My colleagues that I worked with and that I had the pleasure of leading, it just didn't happen very frequently. And when it did, it was dealt with immediately once it was identified. And the tools that you have available are extensive on how to deal with things like that. So
right.
It just, what troubles me is that it's this constant drumbeat today that's it's been in our society and our culture, but it's now getting into the military. And you saw it when the people in the Marine Corps and other leaders, senior leaders in the military, attacked Tucker Carlson a few weeks ago from their government accounts because they didn't like what he said about women in the military, even though they completely misconstrued what he said and listened to the propaganda the media put out about it instead of actually going to the segment and listening to it. But what startled me was they used their official accounts and their official position, and they were in uniform, and that is troubling to me. And then to hear that this is now at our service academies and people are being indoctrinated with the wrong focus from the very beginning that are officers in the military, is very concerning. What are you guys doing about it?
Well, it's a great question, Rob. I'm with a group called Stand Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services. It's an ad hoc group right now, but we're moving towards getting it more formalized. We were effective in getting the old video taken down, the football coach video, with this new video, even though it uses Aesopian language. We're working with Congress and media. I mean, you're helping us in this regard. So we've got really tactical, operational, and strategic levels that we're working on. We're collaborating now with graduates from West Point and the Naval Academy. And really the thrust is more educational than anything else, and to let people know how dangerous critical race theory is, especially for a country like ours that was founded on individual liberty and freedom and the First Amendment and those sorts of things. This is coercive. It's forcing people into ideological positions that are not consistent with our constitutional republic. And as I mentioned earlier, it's insidious. And so the more we can be aware of it, the more we can check it, call it out and check it. That's going to keep us, I think, safe as a country. Otherwise, we're going to cross the Rubicon and we'll be a vassal state of China.
Yeah. You know, critical race theory, the core concept of that is that people of your skin color and our skin color, to correct me if I'm wrong, but the core concept of that is that I have to acknowledge that that everything I do from even when I'm sleeping is systemically racist because of the color of my skin. The way I've read the books that I've read on it and the articles that I've read on it, not from people that oppose it, but from the actual people that push this, that's what I got, the core concept that I get from critical race theory. And that's just not compatible with the United States of America.
It's not. Those that are pushing critical race theory say we should be anti-racist. But what anti-racist translates to is anti-white. And there's a scale there. And if you're old and male, you're probably at the highest end of that scale of being anti-white.
Yeah.
You know, we had a former superintendent, I won't mention how recent or how long ago, that referred to all white males. You know, we chuckle when that person used that expression, but it's very subtle. And so we learned very early in our effort that to say we're anti-racist plays into their narrative. It means we're anti-white. We've been saying, no, we are against racism.
Yeah,
we are anti-racism. And it occurs from both ends of the spectrum. Now, a lot of people say if you're black, you can't be racist. You can only be an oppressed. And that's why the anti-racism, again, it's an Aesopian expression, but it basically means if you're anti-racist, you're anti-white, because whites oppress.
Well, I spent my life in organizations that were not anti-anything based on skin color. They were pro-performance and getting the mission done, which is to, you know, in our case, fly, fight, and win for the United States of America. You know, and that concept is just not compatible with maintaining those teams.
It's not.
Military, it's just not compatible. And I think you see it starting to come apart at the seams. Dr. Scott, go into a little bit about the ideological parts of this to show people, you know, why this is domestic enemy number one. It's not white supremacism. It's not anarchism, anti-government people, but this attempt to divide us in such a way that we cannot be teammates. We cannot be teammates in anything if we continue down this path. Why is that domestic enemy number one?
Well, it's weird sometimes to take a look at it. On the surface, you're thinking, well, this makes sense. I mean, these people are looking for justice, but it's not. In fact, I shared with the superintendent a couple weeks ago, and I know this was probably not easy for him to hear, but what we're dealing with is classic propaganda. And I shared with him, I said, you know, the proposition of systemic racism lacks evidence. The deliberate advancement of narratives that are not clearly supported by evidence is called propaganda. Such a scheme is not new. Here is an excerpt about propaganda already published in the 1920s. Quote, propaganda must not investigate the truth objectively, and insofar as it is favorable to the other side, present it according to the theoretical rules of justice. So we talk about social justice all the time. Yet it must present only that aspect of the truth which is favorable to its own side. And the person that advanced that axiom that is being used by a lot of the people pushing critical race theory was Adolf Hitler in his book Mein Kampf. Hitler understood very clearly the role propaganda plays. And again, it's based on the theory of justice. So when you can put people in different classes and they are opposing classes, it just sets things up for conflict.
It does. It does. One of the reasons why I'm concerned with what's happened post January 6th with Trump supporters. I mean, none of us support violent overthrow of the U.S. government. I don't believe that's what happened on January 6th. I think we had a riot from some people that were not doing the right thing, and a whole bunch of other people got caught up in it by going into the building, et cetera, et cetera. But we also had some terrorist activity that day or the day before with two folks, two pipe bombs being planted at the RNC and DNC headquarters. So it's a mixture of things. But my point with that is that the structure, the power of the United States government and the Democrat Party and some even Republicans have said, if you were a Trump supporter, you voted for Donald Trump, you're part of this group and you're domestic enemy number one. And all that does, in my opinion, is it falls into and aligns with what we're talking about here, because it's intended to divide you away, to separate, people away from people like me and you, who, I mean, we've spent decades serving our country, lost friends, lost family members, risked our own lives, our families have sacrificed. I don't care if somebody's black, yellow, red, white, what their gender choice is. I don't care about any of that stuff. What I care about is that we're all Americans and we all believe that, that we're Americans and we're going to fight for each other, not against each other. But this whole idea and what we've seen happening in practice since January 6th is just an overdrive effort to split us up as a people, and that really, really concerns folks that I talk to out there.
Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, once you kind of get a feel for what critical race theory is, what it stands for, and we see a lot of the division going on in our society today, they're winning, and they will ultimately win if we don't call it out. Bob Woodson and the Woodson Center is doing great work. He's been leading up that 1776 project to counter the 1619 project that the New York Times has basically sponsored. And the 1619 project is working its way across our nation into the different schools.
Yeah.
My own daughter is a teacher, and she has to be very careful because obviously she works in an environment where there's like a litmus test in terms of where you are in the political spectrum, and she's concerned about a lot of the stuff that's working its way into the school curricula.
Yeah. And one of our viewers just commented to me that this all started long before January 6th. I know it did. I just was pointing that out because you can now see it visibly in your government and what it's doing. And that is why that's a key date since then. And we've got to figure out a way to hold people accountable for their actions and resurrect our system of fair law and order, which we're not getting. I mean, I don't know if you all saw it or not, but the teenagers that killed Muhammad Anwar by trying to take his car from him and everything in Washington, D.C. have a plea deal where they're not even going to be incarcerated past 21 years of age. And wherever they're going to be held, it's not going to be a prison. And they murdered the guy in broad daylight. That's not justice. Okay. And it's also not justice if you're accused of being a domestic terrorist because you trespassed, like hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans have done in protest. But what we're seeing with the beginning on January 6th is a visible expression of that government power, and that is wrong here in the United States of America. And Dr. Scott, you're right. I mean, we have to address it and by calling it out everywhere, all the time, every single time, no matter how many times you get called a racist, don't we?
And Rob, I will tell you, for me, to cut to the chase, what was it that defined us as a nation? Our Declaration of Independence. It was the moral justification for who we are as a country, as a nation. And it talked about inalienable rights that were given to us by a creator, not a government.
Yeah.
And then the Constitution codified that system of government, of self-governance, we the people. And we have abdicated our responsibility in that regard. And so when there's a vacuum, it's going to get filled, which, you know, we had a presidential campaign slogan that said, a battle for the soul of our nation. And we're witnessing it right now.
Oh, yeah. It's been going on for a long time, but we're definitely seeing it out in the open. It's no longer behind the scenes. A lot of folks are not happy with the way the election turned out. I'm not either. And the opposition is so emboldened that they actually printed an article in Time magazine, I believe it was, about how they fortified the dang election by using all of these efforts to keep the message out. Which gets us right back to Hunter Biden's laptop. And some of our viewers, we have viewers from both sides of the aisle here, Ron, and and a couple of them have said, "Well, leave them alone. Leave the Bidens alone. You can't hold President Biden responsible for what his kids did and all that." Well, sorry, folks, but if this person's name was Trump or Kennedy or whatever, and we had the evidence that we have on this laptop about child pornography and drugs and potential intelligence and national security implications with our adversaries, Russia and China, our main adversary, China, then I'd be calling for the same thing. And I think Colonel Scott would too. Our political affiliation and party affiliation really makes no difference in this situation, does it? We lost Ron for a second there, but he's back. We left off with our political affiliation, Ron.
Right. I remind people that while my views are considered conservative, I'm actually a classical liberal. A lot of people forget what a classical liberal was. It's not today's liberal.
No, and I have both campaigned on and worked on things like criminal justice reform, and some what some people call libertarian type things like medical marijuana and those kind of things, to the chagrin of a lot of so-called conservatives. But that's because I'm a classical liberal myself. Go look up the term, folks. Don't freak out. And I call it what Dennis Haw calls it. I don't call what I believe in America First, although I like America First policies that Mr. Trump was implementing, because they had the first rise in working people's wages in 40 years. Oh my God, the lowest unemployment for persons of color ever. It still stuns me that it was all thrown away because of mean tweets or something crazy like that. But I mean, so we're Americanists. We believe in America.
Amen.
What it stands for. The people that go fight for the Constitution of the United States and die for it were fighting for Americanism. They weren't fighting for Republicanism or Democratism or whatever other ism that's out there. It's Americans.
Right.
And that's what we are. Joe Biden was right about one thing in his campaign. There is no such thing as a red and blue America. And he stole a line from one of my political speeches and the line was simply this: look, I flew over the United States for over 25 years and I saw red and blue states. I only saw the red, white, and blue of the United States of America. And that's the kind of thinking that we need as opposed to what we're seeing. And that's why we have to stand up and call it out. Am I wrong?
No, you are right, Rob. And what are we willing to die for? And what I would encourage you and the folks that are listening, go on Google and look up American cemeteries across Europe following the Second World War. And what you will find are crosses and stars of David that represented the demographics of our nation that defeated fascism in the Second World War. We didn't defeat communism. We weren't really aware of it at the time. But right now it's a combination of fascism and communism that threatens our nation because they're both rooted in Marxism.
Yeah, they are. I see them as aligning and combining together into something that's different. You can't call it all one or the other. It's something that's different that really has no name yet, but it's a system and form of government that is taking your liberty and destroying it every minute that you don't stand up and call it out and work against it. And I'm talking about us, citizens, folks. Don't stand by. I see one comment. We can't stand by and wait for something to happen. It's on us. I have to go vote today. I have an election day here. So my work day is going to be cut short as I can and get to the polls. But that's not the only thing you should be doing. Do things like what Col Scott's doing and his colleagues. Do things like what I'm doing, encouraging people and teaching people to call their state legislature. Know your Constitution. The Constitution gives power to the states and the people more than any other groups. The federal power is not given freely in the United States Constitution. It's time for us to roll back this overbearing, over-powerful bureaucracy and all-powerful central government and get it back into the constitutional container. But only we can do that. The people in Washington aren't going to do that for us, are they? Yeah, it's on us. Well, sir, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And folks out there, this was Dr. Ron Scott. How can folks find you on social media? I know you've got a website.
I have a blog. It's called Gadfly Corner. It's www.blogspot or gadflycorner.blogspot.com. You can also send me an email if you want. It's oldgadfly@gmail.com. Okay. And I am on Facebook as Ron Scott. I'm not disguised. My ugly mug and my name, Ron Scott. So,
well, Google and other search engines are wonderful things these days. You can find him, just like you can find me at robmanus.com and all the other places. Well, sir, thank you very much for spending time with us and continuing to highlight these truths. And we make this promise to you and our audiences that we will continue to put this out there regardless of the cost. And so far, putting the truth out has cost me personally probably $50,000 or $60,000 in revenue because of the censorship and restrictions that organizations like Facebook have put on us in the last 8 months since September of last year. But it's because we put the facts out and the truth out and let people make their minds up instead of calling something false or true or whatever. We put the facts out that we know because the American people deserve to know the facts and the truth so they can make their own decisions. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it. God bless you. And God bless America. And have a great one.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.